this keeps going quicker and quicker. We're live. This is Jack Kelly live on LinkedIn. Welcome. Good afternoon. So, all right, Christy, we're good. It's all showing up.
Let me check.
Okay, let's just double check before.
Okay, yeah.
Before we
Okay.
go through it.
Nope, you're live.
We're all good. Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to put this out there, and I know a lot of you are going to say, Jack, you're out of your mind. Now, you might not be wrong, but I want to share this. It's a hot job market. I think we could all agree it's a hot job market. Companies are waging a war for talent, trying to find people. There's a great resignation where about 4 million people are quitting on a monthly basis. So you would think rationally, right? You would think that companies would do whatever it takes to get people and to hire people. But shockingly, that's not the case. We hear it all the time. On LinkedIn, you could see people say, wait, you made me take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 14 interviews over the course of 3 months, and I don't hear back. I get ghosted. I don't have feedback. What's going on? You hear people saying, hey, companies are making me take tests. They're making me do reports, doing tasks, doing assignments, no pay, no nothing, consuming all their time, get ghosted, nothing happens. So what I propose, what I think we should start looking at and considering is companies pay people to interview. Now, I'm not saying pay them to make them interview, people who are going on interviews to get paid for their time. Let's just that, I know that's a revolutionary thought, but just think about that for a minute. If you're taking the time out of your day, you had to prepare for an interview, go through the job description, figure it out, do your homework, do research, ask people about the company, prepare an elevator pitch, match up what you do for the job. That's a lot of time and effort. Then you go into the interview. And that would be one thing if it was only one interview. But if you're going, no exaggeration, 3 to 6 to 10 interviews, that's an awful lot of time. Plus, it's a lot of risk because your boss could find out and you could get fired. So wouldn't it be fair? Wouldn't it be fair if you go in good faith, not like a window shopper or make this a gig job, but in good faith that when you go on an interview, the company would pay you. Now, it wouldn't be an exorbitant amount, but just pay you a fair amount for the time and effort you put in. Now, let me take a pause there. Chris, Mike, what do you think I'm nuts? Do you think this is just way out of bounds? Or is there some semblance of reason and that it makes sense?
There's definitely some semblance of reason and sense in what you're saying. I do like the idea of holding companies accountable. I think if you hurt them, if you get them where it hurts in their pockets, they'll definitely reassess the interview process, which is definitely needed because it is. We hear so many people complain about how many interviews they have to go on and it leads to nowhere. So I definitely think that you're onto something.
Thanks, Mike. What do you think?
Yeah, I also agree on that. I think it's a really good point. It'd be tough to judge, what kind of rate or whatever, not to dive too deep into it, but certainly I think it would have an effect on the clients, the firms that are interviewing, definitely rethink their process a bit, try to streamline it and narrow it down, be more sensitive to a candidate's and interviewees, time, and, they have a job to do. Most of them are currently working. So yeah, I think, absolutely, it merits further conversation.
Is that here's a magic could work out. And I get it. I get the odds of this happening are so microscopic, but you don't know. But if let's say 3 years ago, the three of us were talking about remote work and we all laughed, come on, remote work will never work. Maybe fringe a small amount. Now it's here. So I've learned through the pandemic, things are possible. You don't know. So now let's just take this as a thought experiment, right? Let's say everybody who's watching this now, you're the CEOs, you're the executives of these companies, and maybe you're a little far removed from the whole interview process. So you're really not aware. And then you find out they're making people interview 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 times. And we're not talking about C-suite interviews. We're talking about regular people, average jobs who are going through this. And then it's not even they go through it fast. This takes months. There's times where there are gaps in communication. There's no feedback. There's ghosting. You're required, as I mentioned before, to do different tasks. Now, if you would pay a certain amount, how quickly do you think the CFO, the CEO, all the executives would wake up and say, wait, what's going on here? You mean we're paying, let's even say $50, right? $50 an interview. And if you're at a firm that has 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 workers, you might have, 1,000 interviews a day. All of a sudden they're looking at the invoices like, what is going on here? Then they wake up and say, wait a minute, we're paying $50 an interview, even if it's $20 an interview, right? $20 an interview magnified by everybody who's interviewing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, the numbers add up. And wouldn't that capture the attention of management to say something is wrong here? This doesn't make any sense. Why are you spending now? Because they're thinking about the bottom line. They're thinking about how much money they have to pay out. But really, the bigger picture is, well, why is this necessary? Because they're going to tie in the money with is it necessary? So now that it's costing us, like, is it necessary that you have to have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 interviews? Can't you have a better way? Isn't there a better format? And maybe are we training our people the right way to interview, or is there any training at all? And I wonder, and I know at first when people hear this concept, think it's just, come on, this is nuts. But think about it. Wouldn't it change if all of a sudden the senior executives start looking in and saying, like, why do you need 12 people to interview? Why do you need, I get you want to interview with HR, you want to interview with a manager, and I get you might want to interview with the manager's manager. But when you start bringing in, let's get Jane from this group and Tony from that group and someone from over here, and let's get the person who delivers the mail, and let's get the person who waters the plant, and let's get this person, then it gets out of control. And to me, I think what happens, and anyone who's been interviewing over the last bunch of years sees this, it's decision by consensus. And I think in part, you have so many interviews because people are afraid to make a decision. And I'm not even blaming them. It's hard to make a decision. It's hard to make a hiring decision, because if you hire the wrong person, the person turns out toxic, you're going to be liable. They're going to say, Jack, well, you're an idiot. You're a moron. Why did you hire this person? You're a complete loser. And then I look back. But now what happens if I say, hey, Christine, can you interview with me? Mike, can you interview with me? And it doesn't work out. I could always say, hey, it wasn't just me. Christine and Mike and Jane and Bob, they all liked the person too. So it's almost like a decision by consensus, as opposed to really having the manager make the decision. Now, so far, what do you, Chris, Mike? Am I kind of out of line? Does it make sense?
It definitely makes sense. I wish that there was someone overseeing that process before a chief, like financial officer or revenue officer, had to step in and go, hey, what are you doing? There should be someone in there doing that now, but unfortunately there isn't. As far as like getting paid for a first interview, I don't know if that's realistic, but I 100% think that people should be getting paid for those working interviews where they're asked to do a task.
So the two things that you brought up that are really interesting. So to go back when you said, hey, there should be some, like, that's a good point. There should be someone who watches over it, which I guess in theory there should be, but maybe that person it should be kind of a new role created. Like, I don't want to say like a hall monitor, but you know what I mean? Like someone who watches over to make sure how many interviews, are they really necessary? That's a good point. That's interesting. I mean, what else do you think that person would do?
Well, if I may, it's interesting that right now, I think by sometimes when I look on the portals and, some companies, you're able to sort of see what they do as far as, track it, who's interviewed with this candidate and so forth. It's not just, us as recruiters and we see that it's our candidate. So I think they do, definitely corporate HR loves to have, like spreadsheets and keep
Yeah.
data, but they don't obviously have a monetary influence on it, that it's costing them money to do these interviews. So I think for right now, they are watching it to some degree, but to both of Jack's point and Christine, your point, having a financial burden or cost on the interviews would absolutely make them rethink it a little bit differently and advantageously toward having concern and being aware of the candidate's time. Also, Christine, what you were saying about you're not sure initially for the first interview if the candidate would get, like Jack said, either $50 or $20. Well, I was thinking, well, yeah, maybe it could be just like a one-time fee. So each time they interview, they wouldn't have to pay the additional cost, but that would negate the opportunity to have them reflect on, let's not interview so much. If it was just like a $20 or $50, whether you interview once or 20 times, it wouldn't have that effect. So there are, nuances on how to set up this, sliding scale or whatever, as you call it. Yeah.
Go back, Mike. You know what? Those are good points. I'm thinking, to go back to what Christine was saying, I wonder, and maybe they do have this and I'm just not aware of it. And if somebody who is involved with this process watching this, feel free to send a message to us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. But it could be that, if what Christine is suggesting, if I'm understanding correctly, you have this job, you look at the job, you look at the level, the complexity of it, the compensation range and so forth. And then maybe you make a decision. Hey, I think this merits, and I'm making this up off the fly, this merits 3 interviews. And here's why I think 3 interviews. And any more seems a bit too much of a burden on everybody, because if you think about it, it's not just the time of the interviewee. When you have like 6 or 7 people interview, it's an opportunity cost, because that means each person, you're pulling them away from their job. They have to take time. They have to do some research on the resume, maybe take a look at the person's LinkedIn profile, give it some thought, go into the interview. And a lot of managers and just, people who aren't managers who are brought into these interviews, they're not necessarily trained. So they're not sure what to ask. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable. It's easy to resort to the cliche questions. Tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I maintain a lot of that is because they just say, okay, Mike, go interview this person. So you're talking about the opportunity cost lost, that every person who gets involved with that interview process is pulled away from their core job. And if they're pulled away from their core job, they got to make it up later. So and then multiply this by a whole bunch of other people. So it's not only, now let's wait, let's say this, let's throw it in. So maybe you should actually give a little stipend to the people who are doing the interviews and taking time out of their day to do the interviews. Am I pushing the envelope? And maybe they get a little something, even if it's, set them out for a free dinner to say, hey, you know what? After all these interviews, because they're not just interviewing one person, they're into, there may be a slate of candidates. So you might be meeting 6, 7 different people. Think about how much time you're taking away from your core responsibilities now that and then you got to do your work later at night and weekends. So maybe they should get compensated. Come to think of it.
I think that's an excellent point. Right. And you know what? Listen, every company loves to hear, hey, we could get more production out of the same amount of hours for staff. So that's another huge incentive,
right?
That just sort of like, appeared as we're talking about the pay for interviews. So that's really interesting.
Right. Because think about it. It's, I was thinking I should have, I'm dumb. I should have put it in the article I wrote for Forbes about it, because I was going from the interviewee point of view, but if you have, somebody who is going to interview, okay, it's not just one candidate you choose. You could have like 6 or 7. Sometimes I kid you not, I'll hear from companies that say, oh, Jack, we interviewed about 10 people, and what, 10? Yeah, but we have a few more scheduled. We'll keep you posted. Oh my God. So that means some poor schlep is having to interview 10 people, and chances are they're tangentially related to this job. They just sucked into it, and they have to spend all that time and energy interviewing not knowing exactly who the person is, what the person's going to do, not knowing the particulars about their job. And then they say, okay, thanks for spending all that time. And now you got to kind of catch up with your other work.
And then
Weird, right?
sometimes if they're unsure about someone, they'll kind of have them come in and meet with them again for like a second conversation.
Right, right. So yeah, would you mind coming back again? And then one more time. So yeah, the more you think about it, there are just levels there. Like you got to wonder. And I'm not, and trust me, I am not disparaging anybody. I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. It's just we all know, because people who are watching this are mostly white collar professionals, office workers, knowledge workers. And so they've been around the block. They know what it's like to interview. They've interviewed, they know the deal. And it's one of those things, it feels like it's always been done this way. So you just keep doing it this way and nobody is saying, wait a minute, so many things have changed. Why are we just doing the same thing again and again and just making people miserable? You're making the job seekers miserable. All you have to do is just ask a job seeker, how was your experience? And I bet you 9 out of 10 is going to be these horrible, miserable, sucked. It's frustrating. They were rude. They ghosted me. I didn't get feedback. I got lowballed. And yeah, maybe have some sort of overseer to watch through the whole, like an impartial overseer to make sure it flows and it's fair to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's definitely merits further consideration on the company's parts. Yeah, it is a convoluted process, and as far as what Christine mentioned about maybe having a candidate come back to meet the same person again, I can tell you from experience as a recruiter, candidates, once in a while they'll be on board, but when they hear that, they're like, well, why do I have to talk to this person again? I already did. They do not favor that request to come back a second time. In general, very favorably.
Now, what about, Chris, you mentioned about getting paid for projects. That's another area I hear people get very upset about.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
If it's, because some are open-ended, so you can spend upward to I read one person spent 25 hours on a project. They ultimately didn't get hired and they saw their work published on like a blog. So there's so many factors that go into this. And I wanted to know, as recruiters, if your candidate goes to your client and says, I want to be paid for this assessment, or they come to you and ask you like, I want to broach the subject of being paid for this, how would you deal with a candidate that asks that?
Well, now that I'm championing this, I have to say, yes, let's do it. If this was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I'd be like, what? This is nuts. This is why. This is wild. But the more we're kicking it around, it does seem that there's room for improvement. And I will say this is always very frustrating, where sometimes you have somebody who is pre-COVID, where they'll have an interview, but they have to travel to the home office of that place to interview. It seems archaic now, doesn't it? That, hey, why not Zoom? Why not some other, type of, platform? But you would have to go there. And then oftentimes they would say, you know what, Jack, they made me pay, this out of the plane fare or the rental car or all the food and the hotel out of my pocket. That's not fair. Like, what, they should have told me about that up front, or shouldn't they take care of it? So that's kind of another thing that sometimes gets a bone of contention, where if you're asked not only to do a report or task or what have you, but if you have to kind of really go out of your way and spend a lot of money, will you get reimbursed? A lot of firms do, but you're waiting 6 months to get the reimbursement check, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you made me think of something else when you were saying, when Christine asked, or you were mentioning, Jack, well, if the candidate's requested to do a task, it's up to the recruiter to perhaps ask the hiring firm, will you give them some sort of stipend? So I'm thinking, how might this begin? And you know what, in my opinion, all it would take, if, word spreads quickly, if one company, say like one big tech company, just took that initiative and word got out that they were paying, prospective candidates and looking for the best talent for interviews, I wonder how long it would take before some of the other, well, two things. One, would that actually drive better talent to that firm for prospective employees in consideration? And how long would it be before other firms would start to follow if in fact by doing that, a company was able to hire the top tier talent? There's such a competitiveness for that talent these days. So how does this begin is an interesting point. And this might be very well the birth of that idea.
Yeah. You do have it where sometimes you have a leading company, they do it, and then everybody follows suit. Think about it, that's what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, where I think it was Twitter was one of the first companies to say, hey, you could work from home remotely forever. And then sure enough, kind of followed suit. So it could be where, especially it's such a war for talent now in certain sectors, that
Right.
why wouldn't you give a little incentive to say, hey, come in? And let's say, even if it's not money, right? Let's say this, let's say tech, I think we could arguably say like tech is one of the hottest areas and the toughest ones for people to recruit. And I don't recruit for tech, so I just know this from speaking to people and reading and so forth. Maybe paying seems uncomfortable, but what about give them tickets to a play, to a concert, to a sporting event, something but they would have to meet a certain criteria. Like if they meet a certain criteria to show good faith that, hey, we're interested in you. You're not even working here yet, but like, we're going to give you tickets to a Broadway play if you come and interview. I mean, is that off the mark, or do you think that could actually happen?
I think it could happen. I think job seekers, how would you feel if they just start asking questions and advocating for themselves, saying, how much time do you envision this project taking, or how will my work be used? Especially when their work is used like without their permission once they don't get the job. Is it okay to ask that in an interview?
See, I find it this, if let's say you work for a company and you're doing well and they like you and you're just looking for, maybe more money, a better opportunity, or you just want to explore, then you have the ability to push the envelope. Because if you don't get the job, you're like, okay, thanks. It was nice meeting you. I'm just going to go back to my, go back home if you were remote, or go back to the office. It's the ones who either like don't have a job, they're in between, or like really miserable and they're not in a good head. Then it's harder. It's awkward to do that because you just don't want to rock the boat. So you don't bring it up and you hope for the best. So it's not a fair level playing field to do that. I mean, I definitely would encourage people to advocate for themselves and to ask these tough questions, but I also am respectful of the fact that it's a power dynamic imbalance, in that if, particularly for the ones who are in between jobs or who worry about their jobs and they desperately need a job, they're like, I just want a job, whatever, please let me go through this. I'll jump through all the hoops. And it's unfair and sad, actually.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
Jack, you bring up a
Very
good
good
point there. One other thing, as a recruiter in compliance, because it's an interesting point where you're talking about, rather than just like, a monetary amount of money to do the interviews, because then you might get, I'm far from an attorney in employment law, but then you might get into some, questionable things like, hey, is that really, above board? Is that a little disingenuous? And then firms, would start to almost like a bidding war. Well, we pay $50, now we're going to pay $75 this firm. And what comes to mind is some of those, pay to play, code of ethics that compliance has to cover. And also,
I'll like tell your friends, oh, hey, interview, you get $50, you give me 20 bucks.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like how when wholesalers go to a big national brokerage chain like a Merrill Lynch, again, not specifically identifying, but a firm like that, and the salespeople, the brokers, the wholesalers would tell the firm, well, hey, we're going to give you tickets to the Super Bowl if you offer our funds to your, to your customers. And obviously there are rules and things against that. So, it's obviously certainly not as simple as it all sounds, but it definitely is a workable option. And I think you're onto something.
Now, how about this? We all get this, like you get, emails or phone calls and about participating in a survey, but they'll pay you to participate in the survey because they know you're taking time out of the day. It could be, what do they call, not only surveys, for like they're test marketing something and they want you to kind of, be part of it.
Right, like the focus groups.
Yes, focus groups, exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's common. Like, all right, hey, we want you to test our product to see if our product is better than the competitor. Is our soft drink better than this person's soft drink? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to waste my time. Oh, we'll give you X amount, here, we'll pay you for. Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Sure. Why not? So it's done in other areas. So I guess why not here?
That's a good point, where you could have a focus group, but like of interviewees. If the company is going through a current problem, you throw out a solution. Like a question or a problem to them, and just like they would in these like working interviews that they have, and they're forced to come up with a solution. But I do like that idea where you could pay them just like you would a focus group, and it could even be done in the same manner where it's like almost they're all in one room too, and do it that way.
Because a lot of times what happens in interviews, and I'm not going to say that people do it purposely, but you could glean a lot of information from someone when you're interviewing them.
Mhm.
So let's say you're, ABC investment bank or ABC tech company, and you're interviewing someone from your competition. You can pull out a lot. And it's almost like getting a management consulting firm to come in and give you all their information, because once again, it's not just that one interview. You may have, 10 people slated from 10 different companies. So now you're drawing all that information about how they do things at their company. And that's value, that's value that you're taking from that person, and you're getting it. You're not giving anything back in return. Now, maybe you get a job out of it, but not, let's say there are 10 people, but only 9 didn't. 9 took all that time for nothing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you, Jack, as a recruiter, how many times sometimes when we debrief a candidate after an interview, do we hear like, well, it seemed like they were just asking me how we do it at my firm, and I'm not so sure that it's a real job or whatever, so yeah, I think that's done. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like a fishing expedition. Like, are you really hiring? Like you just trying to kind of pick our brains is like, what's the real deal? And once again, if you pay for it, then on scale, companies won't kind of tolerate nonsense because, the cost could add up really quickly. It's an interesting topic, right? It's one of those things where we just take it for granted. And then we just say, okay, it's always been this way, so it always has to be this way. But I figure one of the fun things to do, what we're doing is to bring up these different issues, to bring up, have really smart guests, really accomplished people, but then also just to kind of brainstorm about ideas, whether this works or doesn't work. Sometimes it's good to just put it out there, because then maybe smarter people than us could kind of figure out to have a better system and to help, both, the people who are looking for a job and the companies to make it better.
I agree. I'm kind of going back to what Mike said.
Yeah.
With the bigger companies, they have the pockets to pay people for
Right.
interviewing, whereas the smaller companies don't. So they would just eat up all the competition.
Yeah.
So there are so many layers you have to consider.
So on a different tone, before we head out, so for now, we got some choices for the next, let's see, for the next few ones. There's some interesting things we've been writing about. I said interesting. Now this is not really interesting. This is like tough. If Ukraine and Russia get into a war, what is that going to mean for the job market? We have, let's see, what else we have? We have allegations of ageism at IBM, that they called older workers, I'm not making this up, dino babies, and their species should be extinct. I'm not making this up. I was just writing about it this weekend. Or we could talk about disengagement, that we're now, because of remote work, being isolated, not going to the office for the last 2 years, being careful not to get COVID, that we've just become disengaged as a society as a whole, and then disengaged from work because now you're just kind of in your little silo at home, not you don't have your work husband, your work wife anymore, your little niche of friends there. And what's that going to mean moving forward? These are just a few. So let me know what you like and what you wanted to talk about next. Christine, Mike, any favorite for tomorrow?
Oh, I'm fired up about the disengaged one. We can tackle
Okay.
that one for
Oh, we
sure.
do that tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
I'm
we
on
can talk
board
about.
for that. I'm on
So
board
just
for
as a
that.
teaser, what do you think with disengaged? Like, why do you think people are so disengaged from work and in life too?
I think they're just feeling disenfranchised by the system, and by the system, I mean everything, whether it's, billionaires, seeing billionaires profiting how much however trillion dollars while everyone else is struggling, inflation. You work so hard and then at the end of the day, you can't really afford groceries. We've seen through the anti-work Reddit, the subreddit, like how workers are just treated like crap by their employers. And then there's the mental health aspect where if you're suffering mentally, it's hard to be disengaged. It's a victory just waking up and getting out of bed, and now you want me to be engaged. So there's so many reasons that we could talk about.
Okay, so I think, Mike, I think what she's trying to say is that tomorrow she's going to lead the talk on disengagement. So I think so I guess that's more interesting than dino babies. Okay.
Where did dino babies come from? Like, that's to me like an oxymoron.
I don't know. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, if you try to use that as a slur on someone, it's like dumb. It's not even good. I don't understand it.
Yeah,
Wait,
it's
you're
a
an
poor
old
use
baby?
of poor use of baby boomers and dinosaurs or something. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I will say this. And this is taken from when you go when there's a lawsuit and then they ask for discovery, you got to give it. That's I think how they got they got emails saying that. But then they also had somebody calling, how do we get millennials here and make it like our people aren't all fuddy-duddies?
Oh.
Which I don't know if I've ever when was the last time anyone used the word fuddy-duddy?
Wait, that was literally in there?
Yes. Yeah.
God.
Yeah. So I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something like that they were concerned that they need more millennials because they don't want to make it like everybody here is a fuddy-duddy. Yeah.
Well, you know what? To me, it seems like the person who used that term is a dino baby.
I think so, probably. I think the person who used that,
So.
because that seems like a term from, I don't know, the 40s, the 20s. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. All right, but tomorrow, thank you for watching and listening. Thank you, Mike and Christine. I know this topic probably won't get off the ground, but I think it's important to bring these things up. And we're trying to champion the cause of people who are interviewing and who are workers and try to make their lives better. So when things come up where I feel, hey, this could make a difference, this could move the needle. It was great. And I think for tomorrow I think Christine is kind of, wow, we're going to have an interesting conversation tomorrow. So stay tuned for tomorrow. What do you think? We'll keep the same time, Christine? What do you think?
Yeah, I'll check your schedule too.
Okay.
But yeah,
all right.
Good time.
Well, thank you very much for watching. And what we're going to do is you'll have this on LinkedIn. We'll probably edit it a little bit and then put it into a podcast. So check it out, like it, subscribe to us. And if you want us to talk about certain things, let us know. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.